Ivanka Trump was representing our country at the Olympics when this question from NBC's Peter Alexander touched off a media frenzy.
Do you believe your father's accusers?
I think it's a pretty inappropriate question to ask a daughter if she believes the accusers of her father when he's affirmatively stated that there's no truth to it. I don't think that's a question you would ask many other daughters. I believe my father. I know my father. So I think I have that right as a daughter to believe my father.
Message to Ivanka Trump. You work in the White House. You are a presidential advisor. That question is totally fair game.
But here's the reason that this rankles at me. It's not just that she has taken a job with a formal title in which she should be able to answer this question. She's taken on this issue. Not just women's issues, but the issue of Me Too and women's accusers, right?
It was a rude question, and you know that he never would have asked anybody else that question. And the only reason he asked her is because she's the daughter of Donald Trump.
Joining us now in Houston, Kristen Tate, a columnist for The Hill and author of the new book, How Do I Tax Thee? And in New York, Kathy Aru, publisher of Catalina Magazine and a former editor at the Washington Post Magazine. So, Kristen, let's start with NBC. Was there something out of line with an NBC correspondent asking Ivanka Trump to weigh in on the women who've accused the president of either having affairs or sexual harassment?
Well, first, Howie, this kind of obnoxious question kind of just illustrates exactly why so many Americans hate the media. It was pretty clearly an attempt to just embarrass Ivanka Trump. But having said that, this question was fair game. The media does have the right to ask Ivanka tough questions. Ivanka made herself a top government official, and she cannot exempt herself from tough questions about the president just because the president is her father. That's why we have nepotism laws in this country. But I think what is making a lot of conservatives really angry about this is that we rarely see left-leaning figures facing these kinds of questions. When Hillary Clinton was running for president, Bill Clinton's alleged sex crimes and her enabling of them rarely came up, if at all, on the campaign trail. Those were untouchable subjects.
Kathy, there was a tsunami of criticism saying, yes, Ivanka is a White House official. She should be able to answer any question. And she did answer the question. But Kristen says it was an obnoxious question, but not an unfair one. Your take?
Right, well, I actually agree with Kristen. It was a fair question. The media does have the right to ask the question. The media has the right to ask the big questions. And the sad part is that we aren't hearing answers as often as we'd like to anymore. This White House doesn't like to answer questions, but I'm glad the media is still asking the questions and asking the big questions. And Clinton did have lots of questions asked. Chelsea Clinton was asked about her father's behavior back in 2016. So this has been asked of Democrats as well as Republicans. So they're not ruling out Ivanka Trump or the Trumps in any way. The Clintons have faced the same criticism. So the media is doing what it does best. They're asking the questions.
You know, Kristen, whether Ivanka answered the question or didn't answer the question, it was all guaranteed to make news, so you can see the temptation there. But, was it asked because she is the president's daughter, not because she was a White House official? If you had the same situation at the Olympics and it had been Kellyanne Conway, would NBC have asked that question, or was it because she happens to be, I mean, that's the reason she's there, the president's daughter?
Probably a combination of both. Look, we all know that the media despises the Trump administration. Something like 93% of coverage by CNN and NBC during Trump's first year was negative towards the administration. There's so much hypocrisy in the media. Everybody knows it. If Ivanka Trump were a Democrat's daughter, the media would worship her. She's everything the left claims to champion. She's an independent, strong woman who carved her own path in business, being surrounded by strong men. But because she's the daughter of the most hated Republican in modern political history, she's subject to constant vicious attacks.
And that makes me wonder, Kathy, because, Ivanka Trump in the past, before her father got into politics, generally got good press for her career in New York. And I wonder whether you think underlying this is a kind of a resentment, and this is Jared Kushner, too, we talked about him earlier in the program, that they just shouldn't be there, that they shouldn't have these jobs, the president's family shouldn't serve. But even if you believe that as a journalist, aren't they entitled to fair coverage?
Well, yeah, and they are getting fair coverage. I mean, I think if it was anyone else, if it wasn't Ivanka and Jared, these people probably would have been already kicked out of the White House. So they are getting the coverage. And
why would Ivanka Trump have been kicked out of the White House?
They're such a distraction. They're truly a distraction. And the fact that she was selling
you can't get kicked
her
out of the White House
on,
for being a distraction.
Well,
Kathy.
on day one, she was selling her dresses on QVC, which no one else has ever done at the Republican convention. She was selling her dresses the next day, telling people to purchase her dresses. No one's ever done that in the history of our politics. Like, here's my father. He's running for president. Buy my dress. Literally put out on a tweet the next day.
I got to say,
this was unethical.
You know, I understand questions about Jared Kushner because he's been entangled in the Russia investigation, questions about his business. Ivanka Trump's become a distraction, and therefore she should be kicked out of the White House.
Well,
I think we're seeing here.
They're both a distraction. They truly both are a distraction.
We get it. You don't like them. I wonder, Kristen, whether you think
it's not like or dislike.
Okay.
They are a distraction.
All right, Kristen, I wonder whether you think that there is just sort of an animus powering this coverage of this married couple, and also the larger narrative here about, we talked earlier, White House in chaos, out of control, the president's mad, he's angry, he's isolated, hope leaving. Not that it's all untrue, but do you think that this is driven by press negativity?
Yes, and the media is probably overblowing the amount of chaos in the White House. I will say this, Trump has a bold, brash personality. He tells it like it is, and that probably does cause some conflict in the White House, especially among people who are very used to business as usual in the swamp. But those very same aggressive personality traits are probably why Trump has accomplished so much. I mean, the Heritage Foundation found that Trump accomplished 63% of his agenda goals in his first year. That's amazing.
I want to give Kathy the last word on this question of coverage of chaos and the White House being out of control, and whether you think it's a little bit over-dramatized.
Well, it's truly chaotic. They would be blind. The media would be blind not to report the obvious, that the White House is chaotic. And then we have this president on Twitter showing how chaotic it actually is. I mean, he's chaotic. The White House is chaotic. It's overflowing. It can't be ignored. So the media has to report on it. They're not overblowing it. They're stating the facts.
Fortunately, the segment wasn't too chaotic, even after you initially agreed and now obviously strongly disagreeing. Great to see you both, Kathy, Kristen. Thank you.
The co-founder of Ben & Jerry's ice cream arrested for disorderly conduct after blasting jet noise from a truck with amplifiers in Burlington, Vermont. Cohen says disturbing the peace was exactly the point. Cohen and 3 other activists were simulating what it was like to live under the flight path of F-35 fighters. Local voters decide this week if the Vermont National Guard can keep its F-35 fighter jets at the Burlington airport. The warplanes are scheduled to arrive next year.
Well, it was a pivotal moment in the civil rights movement. 53 years later, hundreds of people have descended upon Selma, Alabama, to commemorate the event known as Bloody Sunday. Brian Yennis joins us live now with more. Hi, Brian.
Hi, Eric. Well, 53 years ago, March 7th, 1965, 600 people crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge to march from Selma, Alabama to Montgomery. It was supposed to be a peaceful demonstration for the voting rights of African Americans. But Alabama's Governor George Wallace ordered state troopers to use whatever means necessary to stop the march, armed with clubs and gas masks, and the white state troopers, some even on horseback, charged and attacked the protesters on the bridge. The nation watched on TV as bloodied men, women, and children gasped for air as police fired tear gas canisters in a day that would become known as Bloody Sunday. Joanne Bland was 11 years old when she participated in the march.
I thought the tear gas canisters were gunshots. I thought they were killing the people down front because that's the first thing we heard, the gunshots and then the screams.
Outraged by the images, protesters from around the country came to Selma, and 2 days later, civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. led a second march, but he too was turned around by police after holding a prayer session. Finally, a third march was successful after a federal judge permitted the protest and President Lyndon Johnson federalized National Guard troops, ordering them to protect 25,000 protesters over the 5-day, 54-mile march from Selma to the steps of the Capitol in Montgomery. Today, Georgia Representative John Lewis led a bipartisan group of congressional members in the annual celebration of the Selma marches, which galvanized President Johnson to push Congress to pass the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The act outlawed discriminatory practices like literacy tests aimed at keeping African Americans from voting, ensuring all Americans are guaranteed their 15th Amendment right to vote. Eric.
All right, Brian, thanks so much. Let's listen to John Lewis, an iconic American. He's there now.
Never gave up. They never gave in, but they kept the faith. They kept their eyes on the prize. And with their blood, they wrote a Voting Rights Act.
And you're here today joined by some very famous colleagues of yours, Reverend Jesse Jackson. How are you doing?
Well, excited to be back here again. We're concerned that the Voting Rights Act of 65, federally protected, was undercut by the 2013 decision. The Voting Rights Act must be therefore restored and protected again so gerrymandering will not undercut and suppression will not undercut that which will achieve. Something to be said when you win by 3 million votes and lose, there's something to be said.
A pivotal moment in the civil rights movement. 53 years later, hundreds of people have descended upon Selma, Alabama, to commemorate the event known as Bloody Sunday. Brian Yennis joins us live now with more. Hi, Brian.
Hi, Eric. Well, 53 years ago, March 7th, 1965, 600 people crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge to march from Selma, Alabama to Montgomery. It was supposed to be a peaceful demonstration for the voting rights of African Americans. But Alabama's Governor George Wallace ordered state troopers to use whatever means necessary to stop the march, armed with clubs and gas masks, and the white state troopers, some even on horseback, charged and attacked the protesters on the bridge. The nation watched on TV as bloodied men, women, and children gasped for air as police fired tear gas canisters in a day that would become known as Bloody Sunday. Joanne Bland was 11 years old when she participated in the march.
I thought the tear gas canisters were gunshots. I thought they were killing the people down front because that's the first thing we heard, the gunshots and then the screams.
Outraged by the images, protesters from around the country came to Selma, and 2 days later, civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. led a second march, but he too was turned around by police after holding a prayer session. Finally, a third march was successful after a federal judge permitted the protest and President Lyndon Johnson federalized National Guard troops, ordering them to protect 25,000 protesters over the 5-day, 54-mile march from Selma to the steps of the Capitol in Montgomery. Today, Georgia Representative John Lewis led a bipartisan group of congressional members in the annual celebration of the Selma marches, which galvanized President Johnson to push Congress to pass the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The act outlawed discriminatory practices like literacy tests aimed at keeping African Americans from voting, ensuring all Americans are guaranteed their 15th Amendment right to vote. Eric.
All right, Brian, thanks so much. Let's listen to John Lewis, an iconic American. He's there now.
They never gave up. They never gave in, but they kept the faith. They kept their eyes on the prize. And with their blood, they wrote a Voting Rights Act.
And you're here today joined by some very famous colleagues of yours, Reverend Jesse Jackson. How are you doing?
Well, excited to be back here again. We're concerned that the Voting Rights Act of 65, federally protected, was undercut by the 2013 decision. The Voting Rights Act must be therefore restored and protected again so gerrymandering will not undercut and suppression will not undercut that which will achieve. Something to be said when you win by 3 million votes and lose.
And then go to court, because that's another system, because a lot of times by the time you go to court, it takes so long to go to court to get the due process procedures. I like taking the guns early, like in this crazy man's case that just took place in Florida.
That's President Trump hinting at dismissing due process and taking guns away from the mentally ill. Some Republican senators are now pushing back.
When you say something like, we'll take the guns first, we'll grab the guns first, and later we'll have a due process conversation, what that means is government is first, and hopefully you have a bureaucrat that you trust to decide what rights you have. That's not how America works.
And to be clear, the due process in such a situation would be on the front end, not on the back end.
Our legal panel joins us now. Rachel Self is a trial attorney, and Mercedes Colwin is a lawyer and Fox News legal analyst. Good to have you both. And we're going to get to that issue of due process later. I want to start here, sure. Rachel. Which gun control proposals currently being discussed would pass all the legal tests?
Well, I think that anything that actually affords people their due process, and it's encouraging to see our elected officials pushing back against the president's very casual disregard of due process. This is a country of laws, and this issue, like all of our important issues, needs to be handled within the bounds of the law. I think that more secure background checks is something that has some bipartisan support right now, because the mentally ill since the 60s have not been supposed to be getting guns in this country. So clearly something's broken in that background check system that needs to be fixed.
Mercedes?
Well, looking at that, it can't be that it's harder to get a beer than to get a gun, and it's harder to drive a car than to get a gun. So definitely access has to be focused. And frankly, look at some of the other laws that we have. So raise the age of the individual that can purchase a gun. I completely agree with Rachel to have very in-depth background checks. Delay the time of which that you're going to purchase a gun and the time that you actually get a gun. And there's also some support about providing some sort of training for individuals, law-abiding citizens that want to purchase these guns, have some sort of training. You can't drive a car without a license. There are jurisdictions in this country that you don't even need a license to purchase a gun. So all of these things, I mean, there's so much. That's why it really is, we're at a point now that people say enough. We've had enough massacres.
Absolutely.
We've had enough deaths. Do you know there have been 68,000 deaths by gun violence alone in 2016? CDC hasn't come out with the statistics that I could see when I was researching for today, for 2017. Yeah, but in 2016, 38,000 people died. Something has to be done.
It's definitely disturbing. Rachel, if we end up with individual state laws on gun control, what kind of legal conundrum might that cause?
Well, I don't think that it would. I mean, states already are all very individualized in how they let people have their guns. And I know, for instance, in Massachusetts, you need to have a license to carry a firearm. If you're seen with a firearm and you're not properly licensed with a firearm, there's a 2-year mandatory minimum jail sentence if you're caught with a gun if you don't have the proper licensing. So every state is individualized. The thing that you're going to run into, though, is where the federal law conflicts with the state law.
Yeah.
And for instance, when there's domestic violence registries statewide that aren't passed on to the federal background check situation. So there are some conflicting things there, and that's where it goes back to fixing the NCIS system and making sure that the background information and all of the data being put into the system is actually being utilized by the people selling the guns and the people licensing for the guns.
Mercedes, will we quickly on this one, will we ever see the ability to, and legal ability to be able to take guns across state lines?
Well, certainly there's going to be challenges for it, but I mean, there will be, but probably there could be some sort of federal registry. I mean, I know there's a federal registry for the background checks. That's where the FBI gets involved. But we're talking about a registry with these guns, a national registry that you can use that in order if there are any challenges of transporting guns from one place to another.
So Mercedes, I'll stay with you. I want to go back now to President Trump expressing frustration over the legal red tape involved in getting guns out of the hands of evil or mentally ill people who want to cause harm. So without treading on civil rights, is there a legal workaround that the president's looking for?
Not that I'm aware of that you can actually do that. I mean, due process is obviously such a sacred right that we have. If there's a property right that's going to be taken from you, and certainly you have to have some due process. But if you front load what we're talking about, if you do the intensive background checks, if you make sure that those with a history of mental illness do not get guns, if you make sure that you have some sort of delay between the purchasing and getting the guns, if you increase the ages, all the things that Rachel and I are talking about, then you won't necessarily need to tread upon due process in the long run.
Rachel?
Exactly. Yeah, she's absolutely right. I mean, that's the thing. If the background checks are being done properly, then you're not going to need to worry about violating someone's due process laws to get the gun out of his hands because he never would have had the gun in his hands to begin with.
Right.
So, do we see answers sometime soon? Yes or no? You can answer at the same time. Yes or no?
Yes. I think it's time.
Okay, well, there we go.
And I love Rachel, and I love you, Arthel.
And I love you both. Rachel Self, Mercedes Coleman, my birthday mate. All right, thank you guys on this very serious topic. Thanks for your legal analysis. Thank you.
Our pleasure.
9 people have been killed, and more than 1.5 million people in the Northeast are still without power after a nor'easter pounded the region this weekend. Conditions are slowly improving as crews clean up the damage caused by flooding and high winds. Now forecasters are watching for another potential weather system that could bring even more rain, some snow later to this area this week. Meteorologist Adam Klotz is at the Fox Weather Center for more with that potential weather system. Adam, what's the latest?
Unfortunately, we are talking about another system sweeping across the country. You see it piling up in the middle. It's always going to be right along these cold fronts. So you see the warm air out in front of it, the cold air back behind. It's been a slow mover starting out in the west. Eventually, this is something that's going to affect the entire country as it sweeps across the northern tier of the country. Right now, you're seeing it move in off the coast. This is the center of that circulation. It isn't a huge storm yet, but as it moves into the northern plains, we're going to pick up a little bit more moisture, and you're going to see this thing pick up wind and really begin to drop a whole lot of snow. We see winter storm watches and warnings from the mountains up across the northern plains, getting up into portions of the Great Lakes. Everything here in the red, a bit of a bullseye for you, that is a blizzard warning. That's going to be running into tomorrow, into Tuesday. Areas like along I-90, I-94 are going to be very difficult to drive coming up here the next couple of days because of this very strong system. Here's your future radar. Put it in motion for you from Sunday into Monday into Tuesday. You see how it moves across the northern plains. If you do live a little farther south, that's going to be a whole lot of rain moving across the region. But the other big concern is going to be winds getting up to 50, 60 miles an hour. Ebony, this is a big system. We're going to be watching it here going into the middle of this upcoming week.
I tell you, Adam, March is bringing some very aggressive weather as it rolls into the season. Thank you.
Welcome back and back to the contentious gun debate happening in Washington. The White House announcing President Trump declared his support for Second Amendment gun rights during a meeting with the NRA late last week. The news following a meeting with lawmakers where he expressed support for gun control measures opposed by the NRA. Let's bring in right now Fox News contributor, former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee. Governor, good to see you. Always a pleasure.
Thanks a lot, Maria. Great to be with you this morning.
What do you think the president wants to do here in terms of Second Amendment rights and any changes around gun control? Will we see it?
Well, I think the big question is, when we talk about gun control, exactly what are we talking about? Are we talking about making it so that law-abiding, legal citizens who own firearms, who have never committed a crime, who have really no inclination to commit a crime, no recollection to commit a crime, are we going to restrict them, or are we going after the people that we need to be worried about? The people who have mental illness, the people who have made threats. You know, if we're not taking care of the laws we have, I guess a lot of people are asking, why would a new law suddenly matter when the old laws that aren't being followed haven't yet changed the course of human behavior?
So it sounds like you think the president is more interested in making sure the laws that are on the books are followed. Obviously, we saw lots of failures on the part of the FBI and the local police in the Nicholas Cruz Parkland shooting. But you think that he wants to see change in terms of